Item 10 now is our submission to MB, consultation on the government procurement rules. And we have Jazz Singh here, our General Manager of Procurement. We haven't got Councillor Sayers present today, have we? Never mind. Okay, welcome, Jazz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as you've said, this is about Auckland Council Group submission to MB's consultation on extending the government procurement rules to apply to a wider set of government entities in the public sector. And the purpose of the consultation is it will inform the policy development process and further advice to ministers. So I won't go through the actual submission document itself, which was circulated by email on Monday, but I will make a few notes in terms of our submission. Firstly, we're doing so as a group, and that includes the feedback from Auckland Transport and Watercare. Other local authorities are also submitting in a similar vein, and I've had some conversations with the likes of Solgum and others who are similarly concerned about the potential wider application of the government procurement rules to local authorities. So the government procurement rules and principles are focused on achieving particular procurement outcomes, and our submission is that we are already achieving those and more as an Auckland Council group through our strong procurement policies and frameworks and practices being driven by the capability that already exists within our organisations. The key points of those outcomes, procurement outcomes, being to be fair, transparent, accountable and sustainable for our communities. Auckland Council, as an eligible agency at the moment, voluntarily participates in all of government contracts, and we have a good working relationship with MB, where we also assist them with some of their policy development. Councils operate within our own legislative environment, which includes the requirements out of the Local Government Act, and we're accountable under the Public Audit Act as well. And we get audited every year around our procurement practices, and I'm pleased to report that we've got Clean Bill of Health and Audit New Zealand support the work that we've done in our procurement processes so far. There are some risks that we identify, and in fact the whole local government sector is identified in the government procurement rules being mandated across the sector, and those risks include additional compliance requirements, additional reporting, and the potential to require approval from either central government or Treasury for some of our larger procurement initiatives, and that is of concern across the sector. Where Council gets funding from central government through Waka Kotahi, for example, or through MB for joint projects like the America's Cup and CRL, we do comply with the rules as a matter of course. Auckland Council Group's size and scale and our procurement capability means that we often achieve better procurement outcomes than can be delivered through centrally procured contracts such as the all of government contracts. We voluntarily participate in a few of those, but more often than not we can get better value for our money ourselves using our own procurement levers. One of the points to note around all government contracts is it actually does cost to participate, so it's not free. If we choose to participate, there's an admin cost of around 1 to 2% of the total spend through those contracts, which then goes towards MB's funding of the structure itself. So there's a risk that mandating rules across all agencies will require a bigger central structure, and there may be more costs associated with that. We understand that there's legal providers who support local government sector are also concerned about introducing potentially new legal issues for local government agencies, which could all add to costs and delays in the future as well. And finally, in terms of Auckland Council, councillors, elected members, we all agree on the policies and outcomes that we want to achieve in Auckland and locally, and we want to be able to innovate in some of our procurement practices and the outcomes that we're looking for, particularly through our social and sustainable procurement guidelines. Having mandated rules may limit that our ability to innovate in some circumstances. So, Madam Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jazz. Look, Councillor Sayers wanted to move this, but he's not here today, and Councillor Mulholland has asked to move. Councillor Watson is Deputy Chair of Strategic Procurement. Do you want a second? Yeah, sure. Right, thank you. Right, questions for Jazz, please. Member Blair.
Kia ora, Jess. I just want to seek some clarification whether you think that the MB procurement rules would likely to restrict He Waka Eke Noa, or what's called Amotai now, because there'd be a concern if it did.
Kia ora, thank you for the question. Through the Chair, I don't believe it would. That's not what the purpose of their consultation is. They're looking just to gather some views while they come up with their policy development. I understand that there is some policy work being done at the moment with Te Puni Kōkiri about introducing targets for Māori spend from the government sector, but that wouldn't, I guess, limit the work that Amotai does at the moment. They are looking to create or engage in an intermediary agency at the moment as well. So that's policy work being done. But I'm pleased to say from an Auckland Council perspective that we're already ahead of the game and we've already got some targets in our sustainable and social procurement guidelines.
Jess, I'm just interested because in Australia the procurement policy is different, and it's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, do they have one where they have a certain percentage guaranteed to the Indigenous people over there in their procurement?
Yeah, through the Chair, yes they do. And we don't have that through central government here at the moment.
I've got a lot of questions, but I'll leave it at that, just around lobbying for that nationally and how Auckland could do that.
Certainly through the Chair, we do support that, and we've been supporting MB with showing them what we've been doing in Auckland and showing them how we could lead the way. And the great work that Amotai does has been working very closely with central government agencies on that.
Right. Councillor Dalton.
Thank you, Chair. Jez, in addition to the 1 to 2% that goes to MB for the privilege, have you estimated what the cost of additional reporting for us would be?
Through the Chair, no, we haven't done that because it'll depend on exactly the type of activity that those mandated rules could cover, but it certainly would be, 3-4%. It may require additional staff resource within our own organisations and potentially additional, what's the word I'm looking for, external confirmation around our compliance as well. So that could add cost on cost.
And just to follow up, sorry, Chair, and then delays in the procurement process as well, and the opportunity cost to local providers that we might use now.
Yes, through the Chair, those are all risks that we would face because if we had to go back and get validation around our procurement plans and approaches in certain circumstances, if we're trying to move quickly to engage local suppliers or to achieve a good outcome, those could be delayed.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Kevin a follow-up to Councillor Dalton, and that is because you've schooled me very well. Acting Chief Financial Officer, don't approve anything without knowing how much it's going to cost. So my question is to you. If we approve this today, are you confident that we'd be able to pay any costs that go with it? Mr Chief, Acting Chief CFO.
Confident? No. Because no, for the very reason we don't know what it would be. Yep.
So you're still happy for us to do it? Yeah.
No, we're against it.
You're against it?
Yeah, we're against it.
Through the Chair, the submission's against the rules applying to
that's
local government.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah, great. Councillor Casey.
Yeah, thanks, Jazz. Yeah, the fact that you didn't know it was against it is what I want to talk about. This is kind of ludicrous. It's again Wellington not knowing what we have here in Auckland, and one of the best things we're doing is social procurement, and it's with the local boards, and it's at their insistence that we use local people wherever possible. We use vulnerable communities wherever possible, and we're doing that really well. Now, that doesn't really come out in this submission, and I just wondered if some politician is going to talk to it, or is it just a written statement?
So through the chair, it's because there's no legislative change, there's no committee that we would front with a submission. It is just informing them of the views of the wider sector. But I'm quite happy, and if with the committee's approval, I'm quite happy to make some tweaks to further enhance the conversation around the better outcomes we're achieving in Auckland already. I do note that that B in the submission allows or delegates to the acting CFO the ability to make some minor tweaks to the submission.
Well, I would like to see some case studies. Just, you know, we're doing some really good stuff, especially in my ward. But we need to they don't know. I know they don't know. And so we need to probably spell out again how it is here with co-governance in Auckland and how we're responding to the local boards. So I would be very happy to add in a few choice words here and there, if it's any help.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would really appreciate that if you'd like to send me anything through that you'd want me to add, but I'm happy to add some examples of the great work that we've done as into the submission itself and circulate that to the committee once we've done that.
And maybe even just a very first bullet point. I know you've got all of that in here, but it's not about the money. For me, it's not. It's about the fact that we're doing it well and we're doing it locally.
Noted.
Yeah, it's about the outcome, isn't it? So, Kevin, you happy with that? Work with Kathy, yep, okay. Councillor Darby.
Yeah, interesting that point, Councillor Casey, because I'm intrigued as following that line as well, and I guess within this, I'm looking for advocacy for not so much that local component. Well, I guess it is a local component, but just I'm aware that you know, dealing with the main contractor with a master contract is quite appealing. You're just dealing with, you know, top of the tree, and everybody trailing in behind doing all the sub trades is responsible up the chain. I guess what concerns me with just preferring a master contract, you don't get a sense of who your local sub-trades are or your subcontractors that are feeding into that master contract. Invariably, if the master contract has a whole lot of other subsidiary companies, they will have.
According to Investopedia, in the corporate world.
Don't ask me.
They will have first digs at you know, being the subcontractors. I don't want to get into a whole contract discussion here, but I am interested in Jazz and others articulating the need to support, you know, the SMEs of Auckland right now, and not just the big corporate guys that are like guys and women that are likely to take the main contracts. You know, ensuring we actually support those SMEs is really important right now. That's where 90% of our business is.
Through you, Madam Chair, I do absolutely agree with that, and through our current procurement policies, guidelines and frameworks at Auckland Council, that is front and centre. The work that we do around our procurement strategies, when we have large bits of work that we are taking out to the market, and also looking at across all of our spend categories, we do make sure that we are first and foremost looking at the market in Auckland and how we can make those suppliers sustainable and have a sustainable market of suppliers. And so when we do contract, we do ask for further outcomes as well in terms of subcontracting locally and making sure that they are treating those subcontracts, you know, if there's a principle that they're treating those subcontracts in a fair way as well. So we don't often look through or try to measure that, but we do have some guidelines around what we like to see in the local community as well. But I'm happy to make that a little bit stronger through the submission document.
Thank you for that. Councillor Fletcher, question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was really just going to comment that, I mean, we're all in agreement on this, and Jazz has articulated it in his normal sort of understated, intelligent way, and it's good that Councillor Casey is wanting to give some practical examples here. But what I want to draw your attention to, and it's probably just reinforcing my own prejudice, but yet again, we have a situation where central government clearly doesn't understand what's already happening in the Auckland Council. And my concern has been, and documented on numerous occasions over the last few years, local government New Zealand doesn't really, Auckland is unique in New Zealand. And we can't rely, and we invest very heavily in local government New Zealand, but they are not going to be our advocacy on these things. We have to be our own advocates. So all I want to do is say, good work, Jazz, good work everybody else who's worked on this. But when it comes to local government New Zealand, let's have a much more realistic relationship on what they can and what they can't do for us. So.
Well said, thank you. Councillor Watson and Councillor Cashmore.
Jazz, you made the comment just then that you were happy to make the submission stronger in terms of how it goes to contracting locals or ensuring people are treated fairly, and then implied that perhaps that sort of facility to investigate or follow up, I suppose, is maybe not as visible or accessible as it might otherwise be. I guess what I'm keen to see in all this is the situation where there's a degree of transparency to what costs might be, particularly at the subcontracting level. So we all hear the stories of people ticking the boxes and taking a cut while it's the poor old subcontractor that's doing the work for appreciably lower cost than what may be getting paid the main contractor. How would or what could happen to open up that aspect of the whole procurement space? How could that be addressed in a way that would ensure that sort of fairness and kind of openness that you alluded to when you commented just a little moment ago?
Thank you. Through the chair. So we have started working across some of our bigger engagements around having nominated subcontractors in some of these contracts. So where we would work with the likes of Amatai, for example, and say that we would like these subcontractors to be part of a main contract, and I know that Auckland Transport has done that recently as well. And in that situation, then there's a contractual mechanism for us to be able to look through the contract and see what's happening. And those are some of the practices that we're looking to evolve further as well. So it's a work in progress.
Follow up in terms of that work in progress. So if examples come up, whatever they might be, that show that this isn't happening or not evolving the way that we would expect, then what is your ability to investigate and to come up with a meaningful conclusion as it might go to decision making?
So through the chair, if there are examples in our current contract, part of the procurement life cycle is also supplier relationship management, so contract management and looking at the overall relationship. And if we are aware that something's not right, we would always have that open and honest conversation with the supplier and be able to get answers and responses and remedial actions if that is what's required.
Final question, in your capacity, you're able to perhaps distance yourself from, in terms of objectivity or investigative follow-up, from parts of the organisation or the main contractor that may or may not have a vested interest in the status quo. Is that correct? I'm just thinking of other parts of council where there is a kind of you know, for want of a better word, an investigative division that has ability to kind of step aside from within to look at matters. Do you have that, or is it still going back to the people who, you know, structure the whole gig?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm not really sure I understand the question. Are you saying whether or not we get involved in the contract management side of things?
I'm just talking about when, you know, contracts in many instances invariably come down to price or what's tendered. It's been some of our experience that often that information doesn't get through in shape and form. If we're looking to cut the best deals, for, you know, in terms of the community, I'm still not sure how that gets through, other than a contractor perhaps making an unsolicited bid, for instance, bring it to people's attention. So I think there's still a number of walls within the current process that stop that kind of accessibility of information that we would expect if we're looking to drive the best deals across the organisation.
Yeah, you're sort of dealing with your committee's detail, I think, in this, but I do take your point. Councillor Cashmore.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Jazz. Did you hold the pen writing that submission, or was?
Yes, and borrowed heavily from some other people who are thinking the same way.
So it's very politely written, I thought, compared to what the actual reality is here. So we have not only led the charge with procurement when we have a set of weightings. It's not all about price, it's about delivery of good outcomes, and part of that is social procurement, part of that is growing SMEs, and part of that is actually getting value for money. And you think of the Project 17 work, Madam Chair, where we actually achieved some really great outcomes by combining contracts and having bigger envelopes. And the point I would make, Jazz, that the government needs to understand really clearly is longer term contracts. Instead of 3 + 1 + 1, they have 5 + 1 or 5 + 3 + 1 + 1. And they're graded all the way through. And talking to other things, we're having alliance-based contracting where it's not a strict tender procurement, especially these uncertain times in a longer time frame. An alliance-based contract like CRL, it enables you to develop relationships with the people who are doing the work, and you can talk through problems and issues as they come up, rather than having very expensive alterations to contracts, people walking away from contracts and people going bankrupt, as we are seeing in Transmission Gully at the moment. If you do get a chance to speak to it, Jazz, emphasise long-term contracting to bring down costs and the weighting system, and some of those good examples that we have actually done, because we know that we've had some really great outcomes from our procurement work, and the team's done. It's always going to be a growing feast, and you've said that yourself many times. We keep altering and moving it to make it better all the way through. We don't need the help of MB in this regard, Madam Chair. We could actually show them how it could be done.
Yeah, and I think if you need help submitting, I think you might like to take the Deputy Mayor with you. And well, I know they don't like you, but actually they need to listen to what you've got to say. You don't have to like everyone you work with, Councillor. Sorry, I'm losing the will. Right, Councillor Watson, Councillor Mulholland has added a little extra bit to the recommendations. Are you happy as a seconder with that extra?
Pretty good.
Sorry, I'll take content. Councillor Mulholland, do you want to talk to that?
Yes. Well, I think it's appropriate. We could actually add a few more words given what the fabulous Deputy Mayor has just shared with us. But if the seconder would like to comment, or if the seconder's happy with that, that's good. Yeah. Sorry. Yep.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, I'll take it to the vote. Oh, no, I won't. Councillor Walker.
Had another question of Jazz, and it goes like this. Quite obviously, one of our circumstances is a climate emergency. And given that much of what we deliver that goes to carbon is through our contracting, are we in a position where we can make much more aggressive changes to contracts, particularly where there are issues that go across many of our contracts that are geographical?
Is this part of the submission?
Well, yes, it is, Madam Chair.
Really?
Yeah. Well, we've got social procurement. I mean, carbon procurement is inherent in our submission. We mention it. That's what I'm speaking to.
Jazz?
Madam Chair, I can answer that question in that every bit of RFP documents that goes out at the moment as part of our weighted attributes about social and sustainable procurement, we actually ask the question of all the suppliers who submit to say, what are you doing to contribute to Auckland Council's climate action framework goals? And so it can be different, and of course in different contract contexts. If it's construction, it's about reduce carbon in the construction program. If it's a maintenance, it's about what they can do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, etc., etc. So that's already part of our current procurement activity, and it's only being enhanced and strengthened for the time being.
Thank you. Look, Jazz, I think you've heard the sentiments around the table, and it's pretty much universally accepted that we support you in what you're trying to do here, but more tangible examples that we can give just to show the difference and help educate, I think will be very helpful. So we have a mover and a seconder. I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Against?
Aye.
Carried. Thank you. We'll take a 5-minute break, ladies and gentlemen. Back at 5 past. Thank you.